You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 394 of the podcast. And in this one, I interview Will, who has kindly come on to share his OCD story with us. And in particular, we talk about growing up in a toxic environment, we talk intrusive thoughts, confessing as a compulsion, perfectionism, being active duty in the US military, identity struggles, a bad relationship with alcohol, themes of OCD including paedophile-themed OCD, relationship-themed OCD, sexual orientation-themed OCD, suicidal-themed OCD, harm-themed OCD, as well as a fear of crossing bridges, health anxiety, being hyper-fixated on sleep, his journey to finding suitable therapy, peer support, an intensive outpatient therapy program, masculinity, developing self-compassion, and much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So I really enjoyed chatting with Will. I hope you find his story inspirational and helpful. And of course, thank you to you guys, as always, for listening. This podcast exists because you keep listening and have listened. So thank you so much. And without further ado, here is Will. Welcome to the show, Will.
Oh, thank you, Stu. Long time listener, first time caller.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Never heard someone say that on the podcast. That's good. So, Will, thank you for coming on and willing to share your story. I'm eager to hear it. So, yeah, you can share that now in as little as much detail as you want.
Okay. So my name's Will. I've had OCD since as far back as I can remember, even though, I didn't know quite what that meant back then. I grew up in a very kind of toxic, chaotic household. Father was a very typical Southern father, very toxically masculine. I grew up under the modicum of "suck it up, boys don't cry" type household. So it was very difficult for me, as I was more the introverted, kind of quiet kid. So went through a really nasty divorce battle. So that was really heavy on me. So the first time I actually remember, the first big episode of OCD I can actually remember, it was when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I used to watch wrestling a lot, and so like WWF or whatever it was. And I remember having this thought, like, what if I punched my dog in the face? And I sat there and thought about it for a while, and I started ruminating on it, and it just terrorized me for weeks. Like, I would stay awake about it. I couldn't sleep. I would just constantly mentally review it, and I separated from myself from my dog. Like, I couldn't be near my dog. And finally, after about 2 weeks of terrorizing, I went and confessed it to my dad. That's one of my big compulsions is confessing. And I confessed it to my dad, and he was, it's no big deal. We all, have thoughts about that. So that was like a huge relief for me. But that was the first time that I actually recognized that I had something that was not quite right there. I've always had a little bit of trouble sleeping. So that when I would get into those big themes as a kid, that always just kind of kicked it into high gear. So something else I remember from when I was a young man. Oh, and I want to say back then there wasn't a whole lot of treatment for anything OCD related back in the 90s and in the early 2000s. And even then, growing up in that kind of household, mental health was kind of a taboo word back then, especially being that it was just me and my dad. There was no real talks of mental health, no real emphasis placed on it or anything like that. So there was no real help to be had in that instance. So the second big theme I remember when I was a kid was pOCD. My father worked nights a lot. He was a construction worker. And I remember being at my babysitter's house. It was an old, couple in their mid-40s, something like that. And they had a newborn baby boy. And I remember watching them change him on the couch. And I had this thought to myself. I was like, wait a minute. Did I look at that too long? Did I like that? Did I not? And so I chewed on that for about 2 weeks. And I remember that was a big one because, obviously hitting animals is terrible, but that one didn't hit quite as hard as this one. And that one was the second time I had a big OCD theme, but that one seemed much larger than the first one, in terms of physical pain and mental and emotional pain. So I remember it was the same kind of 2 week thing where I chewed on it, ruminated about it, and mulled it over. And I finally, again, worked up the courage to tell my father about it. He had an explosive reaction. Kind of, don't you ever effing say anything like that to me again. And it was that point where I started to believe that something was wrong with me. Because I think, of course, I think that reaction had a lot to do with it. Because my father he was a single father. He's the only one I had at that point. So, so at that time, I just kind of internalized everything. And that was the start of me really just internalizing everything and holding it in. I also developed a lot of perfectionism issues when I was a young man, because in my household, the love and acceptance was performance based. So it was very much my acceptance and outward portrayal of love for you is based on what you do, the grades you bring in, the amount of chores that you do. It was a very militaristic type household. You know what I mean? I had chore lists that I had to focus on every day. And, and if everything wasn't 100% perfect, then I was in trouble and I had love pulled from me. So that caused a lot of issues going into my adult life. So moving on a little bit, still no help at this point. I was at this point I was afraid because I know Chance has talked to you about it a little bit, but McNeely on one of a previous episode. But in a Southern household, the whole bootstrap phrase, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't talk about mental health. You don't ask for help. Men don't ask for help. Men don't cry. We're the rocks, which is total garbage. But so moving on into high school, I kind of had a little bit of a lull, I feel like, with huge themes in high school. It kind of took a backseat. Now, the perfectionism was still very much in high gear. Everything I did had to be absolutely perfect, even outside of my household, or else I would start feeling really dysregulated if everything wasn't perfect. If I got a B- on a paper, or if my shoes weren't organized a certain way in my room or something, I would start to feel off. So, but other than that, there was no big themes in high school. I think I was too focused on partying and girls and where the next case of beer was going to come from for that. But still a lot of rumination, a lot of perfectionism stuff. And like I said, my father and I clashed a lot throughout my childhood, and that caused a lot of emotional pain for me because I was more of a chubby rock and roll kid, kind of introverted, wanted to play video games, and he had this idea of me that he wanted me this rough and tough Southern kid that out fishing and dipping and spitting and fighting and all this mess that was just totally not me. So that caused a lot of confusion in me too, emotionally. You know what I mean? Because again, having that love and acceptance pulled from me only made that perfectionism and rumination worse, because then I would start developing self-esteem issues, and I would start ruminating about myself. And so it was pretty bad. But so after high school, I still no help at this point. After high school, I made the decision that I didn't really want to go to college. College really wasn't for me yet. So I made the decision to join the military, the U.S. military, which I am still active duty and in the military today. Which, if you've ever talked to anybody in the U.S. military, specifically a male, if you have masculinity issues, the U.S. military is definitely not the place for you. Because there's probably not a more hyper masculine job that you could possibly have. So this is when my OCD really started to blossom, so to speak, in the really heavy hitting themes. This is when they started to come in. I started doing a lot of things that were very much out of my character, and I didn't really think about it until later on, how much of an effect that played on me and what I was actually doing. So again, kind of a chubby, introverted, rock and roll type kid, happy, introverted kind of guy joining this outfit. It was a culture shock. So from there, I spent a lot of time in my focus trying to conform to what my father's idea of a man was. So I started working out heavily. I started fighting MMA. I started, really placing an emphasis on chasing girls. I hate fighting, by the way. So if that's any indication, yeah, I really hate fighting, but I started doing it anyway because I thought this is what I need to be doing to conform to what the depiction of a real man is, which caused a lot of pain. I drank a lot. I had a really abusive relationship to alcohol, very, to the point where if I wasn't at work or if I wasn't fighting, there was alcoholic beverage in my hand for sure, and binge drinking on the weekends. I also, going back to being that introverted kid, I didn't really have a whole lot of luck with women back then. So I turned my focus and my sights on sleeping with as many women as I possibly could handle at that particular time. And I would wake up the next morning, and it was this repetitious cycle because I would wake up this next morning with another partner and, hungover, and my anxiety and rumination and guilt was 3 to 4 times as bad. You know what I mean? Because I was trying to chameleon myself into something that I'm not, and I didn't know it. So yeah, anyway, very bad relationship with alcohol. And that whole scene there lasted for about 10 years. And I didn't know what to do. So the sleeping with multiple women, that kind of blossomed into a lot of relationship OCD stuff, because I would always find a way to pull away from them, these women. So I would find something, I would start thinking about these things like, her ridiculous things like her left toe on her right foot is longer than the other one. I can't deal with that. I would just start making things up. Or I paid for 2 meals. She must be after my money. Or, you know what I mean? Something ridiculous. Yeah. And after so many years of that, I had the idea in my head. I was like, well, if you can't hold a relationship with a woman, then you must be gay. I said, okay. And so, and there went that. And again, coming back to this hyper-masculine employment, that was, and especially being from the South with hyper-masculine employment in the U.S. military, because back then there was still a don't ask, don't tell policy in the U.S. military about that. That was still a very taboo thing. And so I was terrified. Like, it was a big shock for me. I was like, oh my God, this can't be happening. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but when you start going to those, when it's not something that's anywhere related to you, it was hard. So that caused a lot of issues with me. That led into the Great AIDS scare. That was another big one. For some reason, I was because I was tired and and I had some body aches or something. So of course I started Googling. That was a big one of mine. Googling, looking at forums, constantly Googling symptoms. Came to the conclusion. I was like, okay, well, WebMD says I probably have AIDS. So there's that. Went and got tested for that about 6 or 7 times. The doctor each time came back and they were like, no, you don't. And I would go, well, okay. I would feel good for like 2 hours. And then I would jump on the forum and be like, well, how cured are these things? And somebody would say something on there like, oh, it takes some time to incubate or something. I was like, oh, then I would get all riled up again. And I would go back and get another one. I didn't believe the doctors. I was under the assumption that I was going to have to live in an AIDS community and nobody would love me. And I would get kicked out of the military. And it was just a whole thing of fictitious, you know how it goes. But that was terrible. So moving on from that was a couple of big ones. I had an intense fear of crossing bridges. I used
Mm.
to have my friends. I had this thought that I was going to pass out at the wheel and careen off the bridge, um, or that I was going to lose control of the car, or I would get to the top of the bridge and I had the urge to jerk the wheel and fly off the bridge. And I used to have my friends drive next to me on the bridge, going over it. Um, so there was that. I was trying to think. There was a lot going on at this time. There was a lot of internal struggle, a lot of alcoholism going on, a lot of focus on my health too. Like I had a really bad fear of passing out or having a heart attack. I recreationally I hunt a lot, and I would always have this big fear that I'd be out in the woods hunting, and I would have a heart attack, and nobody would hear me, and I would die. And it was the same thing going over the bridge. So moving forward a little bit. So probably another one of the biggest ones was sleep. I was always hyper fixated on sleep. Even as a child, I was hyper fixated on sleep. Like if I didn't have enough sleep or I was going down to sleep, because one of my main compulsions is also distraction and avoidance. So I would busy myself with something 100% of my day, just constantly move, busy. Because if I slowed down, my brain would catch me. So, and as you lay down and go to sleep, there's no escaping your brain at that point. It's just you and the ceiling fan. So that was a big one for me, and that was probably the most long lasting theme. And that theme, I would go outside late at night when I couldn't sleep and check neighbors' windows to see if their light was on. I'm like, oh, okay, well, their light's on. I'm not crazy. I'm good. Start Googling how long it takes you to go crazy from lack of sleep. All the good stuff. But that theme actually drove me to ask for help the first time.
Yeah.
Not that wasn't rock bottom yet, but I had asked for help in some capacity, reached out to a therapist and told them I needed help for sleep anxiety. And they're like, what? Well, we don't know what that is, but we're going to talk to you anyway. They brought me in. It was a typical talk therapist. It was one of the one size fits all type therapy things where 26 specialties under their list of specialties there. And that didn't work. That just made things worse. He would tell me things like, I don't know, you don't have any reason to be anxious, man. You've got money, a beautiful home, a nice family. And I'm sitting here like vibrating like, oh, Jesus, he's right. And that would send me on an absolute tirade. So that didn't work. And I tried one or two other talk therapists at the time. And, I got into some suicidal ideations type things and fear of suicide and all this stuff. Like, what if I lose control? And saying that to a lot of talk therapists, that kind of set off an entire other set of alarms that set off more alarms within me. So I kind of stopped. I backed away for a number of years. And I was just, at this point, I was believing that I was like, well, whatever I have, I don't know what it is, but I'm untreatable. You know what I mean? Nobody's going to understand. I can't tell people these thoughts. Like I'm a guy. You know what I mean? I'm in the military. I'm supposed to be the roughest, toughest there is. I can't tell anybody what's going on up here. I'll get fired. They'll lock me up. Whatever. You know how it goes. But so the big one, I call it the big one. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. So back in 2020, my son was born. We only have one. My wife and I, we only have the one kid, and he was born into the height of COVID, like right into the absolute peak of it. So, which of course, that was the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I love my son and my family with everything in my body. So when he was about 6-7 months old, maybe a little bit older, somewhere within a year, he got COVID. And this was in the stage of COVID where nobody knew anything. You know what I mean? It was still, this crazy virus that's killing everybody. And it was still madness at that time. And my son got it. And I remember I had never felt fear like that in my life. I was so terrified. And the intrusive thoughts that were hitting my brain were just gruesome, of his death, of like how I was going to process it. It terrified me to the core, to the point where I was in bed shaking and crying and all this kind of stuff. So after he got better, and then I noticed after he got better, I would lay him down at night or lay him down for a nap, and I would have this image of me punching him in the face. And I couldn't get rid of it. And at this time, again, no OCD treatment. I was still very much identified with my thoughts, very much under the assumption that if I'm thinking it, it must be true and I must want it. So that was the bad one. That went on again for about a week or two until I broke. I hit rock bottom. I have a workshop out in the back of the property where I build guitars and things like that on the side. And I remember it was late one night. I couldn't sleep, and I was laying on the floor of my workshop, screaming and crying at my brain to take anything but him, to take my sexuality, take my health, take my sleep, take anything you want, but please don't take my son. Pleading with my brain. And it was at that time I knew, I was like, okay, this is it. We got to do something. Military be damned. You know what I mean? I'm going to do whatever I got to do. I got to do something. So I worked up the courage to tell my wife, because I didn't tell her much about it. She knew I was always an anxious person and kind of perfectionistic and neurotic, so to speak. But she didn't know, I didn't go around telling her the deep dwellings of intrusive thoughts in my brain. So I finally worked up the courage to tell her. And she's incredible. Like, she's incredibly empathetic. She's the sweetest person on earth. Definitely who I need to be with in my life, for sure. So she started Googling some stuff, because at that point, in our relationship, I wasn't allowed to Google things anymore. Okay. I wasn't. Whenever I had to take a new medication, I wasn't allowed to Google side effects. I wasn't allowed to Google things like that, because, as you know, with OCD, I would be 16 feet deep in the rabbit hole in 15 minutes. So she was Googling these type of things and these intrusive thoughts. And she came up to me and she's like, have you ever heard of OCD? I'm like, what? Like washing your hands? I don't flip light switches on and off. Like, no, I don't. That doesn't make any sense. And she bought me John Hirschfield's book, Harm OCD. And I remember sitting there reading it, and I bought the audiobook, and I'm driving around in my truck listening to it, and my mouth is just open the entire time. I'm like, oh my God. Wow. Okay. This there may be something here. So at that point, I broke the rule and I started Googling, and I found your podcast, found the OCD story. So I started listening to a few of these interviews and stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, this has got to be it. Like, this has to be what it is. But at that time also, I was trying to find any reason not to identify with it, with OCD. I was like, well, so this is different. He has this kind. So no, that's not it. It's not it. I'm crazy. You know what I mean? I was doing that back and forth for forever, until I found your interview with Chance McNeely. And I listened to his, and I was like, this guy's just a regular Southern dude I can tell he's got masculinity issues. I have got to talk to this man. Like, I have to. I set that as a goal for myself. I was like, I gotta talk to this guy. And this was pre-treatment again. I did some further Googling, and I found the woman with the big blonde hair, found her on YouTube, and I started, listening to all her videos. And I was like, all right, so we're going to do this. We're going to figure out something else. So I called NoCD. I worked with NoCD for a while. It was like the 10 session type thing at the time. And I, completed those things. So I left that. And then I was trying to find a one-on-one specialist. So that was intensely difficult for me, because everybody in the United States military has the same insurance. We all have Humana TRICARE Prime. And it was next to impossible to find anything that took that insurance. I tried doing a couple talk therapists, and again, that just didn't work. So, in the meantime of trying to find a specialist, I jumped on with OCD peers, and I started working with Chance McNeely. I worked with him for about 3 years, and I still do peer support, still weekly. Still do groups weekly, but I started working with OCD peers, and I started reaching out to everybody because I was having, for about a year, I was having an incredible difficulty finding an OCD specialist. I mean, I could find the one size fits all 26 specialties, but nothing that was just clearly OCD. I emailed some advocates in my area at the time and reached out to the IOCDF. They didn't know of anything. So Chrissy Hodges started looking for me as well. I reached out to her, and she found an IOP program, Amita Health, a virtual IOP program. So that took it. So I signed up for that. I did a 3-month IOP, which was intensely helpful, intensely. And so that, in combination with peer support, really started dialing things in for me, and really started bringing me back down to reality. And like I said, I still do it today. I still do the weekly groups and things, which are intensely helpful. So yeah, that kind of brings me to where we are today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I know it was a long story. I probably left out 700 things, but
Yeah, of course, it's impossible to fit everything in. And every time you tell your story, it will change, because there's just so many things that need to come out. Like I said,
it was difficult too.
Yeah, well, what needs to come out will come out. And that, yeah, you said that it was difficult to share it. Is that what you meant?
Well, it was difficult to share it, and I didn't. So this is the first time in preparing to talk with you, I had written like 10 pages worth of notes, because nerves and all that, and just to keep me on track. And this is the first time since I entered recovery years ago that I had ever thought about my story as a whole, that I had ever gone back. And it was actually a fantastic thing. I was talking about it last night on Groove, and I was like, it was scary, because it started flooding all these different emotions and remembering things from my past and these really, really harsh themes. But it was also amazing to me at the same time, because in OCD treatment, I've noticed a common theme with a lot of us is we have trouble seeing how far we've come. We have trouble seeing how far we've actually come and given ourselves that credit. And as I was going through these things, I was like, holy cow, dude, like you're doing it. Like, look at where you've come. Like, look at where you were then and look at where you are now. You're an incredible human being. So it was a huge ego boost for me in a good way.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I shared that last night with the group, and it was a big accomplishment for me to be able to look back on that.
Absolutely. It's important to do that. And so, well, thank you for sharing your story. And you were talking about growing up in kind of toxic masculinity, and for me, that's the true definition of toxic masculinity, not maybe the way it gets thrown around a lot in the media at the minute. Sure. Because it can get overused, in my opinion.
Definitely.
Probably gonna get hated saying that, but you grew up in a very stereotypical masculine environment, and this is the way to be masculine. And if you're not masculine.
100%. Love and acceptance was pulled away.
Yeah. It's a load of rubbish, right? Masculinity can come in many forms, and and I guess so. There's that, and I'm sure that, as you said, impacted self-esteem and all of this stuff. I think you said that, and then and then now here you've just said how you reflected and how you're proud of yourself, right? Because of the change. Yeah. So, we could call that self-compassion. I'm sure you have that now, and you've worked on that. So I just
working on
it. Exactly. Anything you want to say about developing that? Because for a lot of men, but also women, it can be really hard to go from hating yourself or not liking yourself to really giving yourself credit.
Yeah. So along that toxic masculinity front and developing my new views of masculinity. Now, I skipped over a lot there when I talked about it, because I talked about growing up in a toxic masculine household. I kind of started, maneuvering myself into what I thought a man would be. That was also what I will say, and specifically for a lot of men and women as well, and for specifically military people. Admitting those things and even getting to a place where you can ask for help. That was probably one of the largest barriers in my recovery ever. Like getting over that hump of, this is not what it means to be a man. You are allowed to ask for help. And guess what? Boys do cry. Getting to that point where I actually believed that was years.
Yeah.
Years. I still have it flare up now. Like when I'm staring off into space and my wife can tell I'm ruminating, and she's like, what are you thinking about? I still have that little bit of hesitation. I'm like, oof, I can't tell her about that. You know what I mean? Got to be a rough, tough guy. So that was a huge barrier in developing that belief in myself, formulating my own belief about what it means to be a man. Took years and years and constant effort and constant acceptance and constant practice of self-compassion to get to the point now. And that's why I love going to these groups and stuff, because I work with that. I work on that every day. I work on that. Like I'll be texting back and forth with some of the males in the group, and we'll just have these deep emotional conversations. And 5-6 years ago, that was death. That was death for me. So just constantly trying to break down that barrier, and especially with the military thing, like asking for help in the military is a very taboo thing. Everyone's afraid that they're going to lose their job. People are going to judge them. People are going to look at them differently. And I still have flares of that too, very much, but getting through that, just pushing through it. And the biggest thing was developing your own views of what it means to be masculine. Like me believing that I don't have to accept what everybody else, I don't have to be Walker, Texas Ranger. You know what I mean? To be a man. You know what I mean? And being accepting and happy with who I am. That was gigantic. So yeah, I definitely, in self-compassion, it can kind of be a super difficult thing to practice, especially if you have self-esteem issues and things of that nature, or you're highly perfectionistic and you're always holding yourself to that golden depiction of yourself in the corner. You know what I mean? So, but that's still something I have to work on every day. Like literally every day, sometimes hour by hour.
Okay.
I work on that. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. And when you, I'm assuming the military know about the OCD, because otherwise you wouldn't be on this show using your full name. When you eventually did open up, how was it handled by them?
It was fine, actually. Yeah. That was the other big thing, because, well, when I was shaking my head a little bit there, like they know, they do know. The people that need to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's actually one of the reasons why I also wanted to do this, is because I'm still breaking down those barriers. And that this to me was like a real big punch in that, like, okay, let's get it out there. Let's talk about it. But they accepted it fine. Like they really did. The people that needed to know, the medical staff and all that, it was actually very surprising, because they got me the support I needed. Nobody isolated me. They actually gave me the time off work I needed, or that altered my work schedule to get that help. And I never would have believed that. I thought if I even mentioned anything, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to lose my job. They're going to fire. No, none of that happened. I'm still very much in the military. I've been in for 15 years, still going strong. And I have a very different view of life now. But yes, they viewed it much differently than I thought they would.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have a ton of questions coming to mind about the military and masculinity.
Yeah.
And I think if I go down those questions, it's going to become a podcast about masculinity. And I want to stay more, which, could be very useful. But there's maybe, if we have time, I'll circle back.
Sure.
So on the whole, boys don't cry. That's a belief in some way in the UK, at least when I was growing up, was sort of there. I've struggled to cry over the years. I start to well up. Even now I can be in session with clients and they could say something that really profound about their life, and that I can feel that, and then you tear up a tiny bit. But full release for me is like really hard from a crying point of view. So I guess, did you find growing up in that environment that it became hard for you to cry? And if so, is it easier for you now? And then if so, how did you get to there where it was easier for you?
Yeah, so it was very difficult. I had to cry in secret, pretty much into my mid 20s, late 20s, actually. Yeah, late 20s. As a kid, I used to go hide and cry because if I cried openly, I got the "I'll give you something to cry about" speech. So it went very much as a child. I had to hide and cry, or if I even got to the point where I felt like I needed to cry, I would shame myself for even getting to that point. Like, you don't need to be at this point. You're a rough, tough dude. You need to, all that crap, garbage. But even in the military, I remember when I would be on deployments, right, and I would be in my bunk, like crying quietly into a pillow because I was neck deep into a theme, a hard theme, like a bad one. So even then, I hid it and have felt that shame of getting to the point where I even need to cry. That's what made me feel the quote unquote craziest. Yeah. That I even felt like I needed to cry. So I didn't get to the point where I was open about crying until about 2 years ago. I read a lot of different books, radical acceptance, a lot of different things like that mention emotional release. And just basically in progressing me being open about mental health and the struggles that I've faced, it's progressively got me there. Like you said, full release, even still now, not so much, but I have like a little bit of a, you know what I mean? Before it happens, just a little edge. But now crying is my main, that is my main release. A lot of times too, even if I'm not in an OCD theme or in a spiral, I'll be dealing with because I'm a very emotional man, and I love that about myself now. Now. So even now, like if I'm going through some emotional real life stuff, not just necessarily OCD, like I'll get home at the end of the day and be like, you know what? And I'll announce this to my household, my son, my wife, everyone else, like, feeling pretty emotionally full. I'm going to go cry. I'll be back in a little bit. And I'll go upstairs. I got my crying pillow that I'll hug, and I'll just sit here and let it go. Sometimes, some weeks it's 2 or 3 times a week. I love it now. And getting to that point was really just continuing to practice self-compassion, whatever that means for each individual person, and being open about my mental health. The more I was open about my mental health, the more I saw that it was accepted and it was okay. And the more that it was less taboo for me. And plus now I'm at a place where talk therapy wasn't for me before OCD treatment. Now I'm in intense trauma therapy. So talk therapy is what I'm doing now. And so that's something that we've been breaking down in my trauma therapy, is being okay. Crying is a completely natural thing, and practicing self-compassion and all that kind of stuff. So getting to that point for me, that's what it looked like. It just being open and breaking down the barrier that mental health for men is taboo.
Yeah, which of course, as you slowly open yourself up more and be more vulnerable, that's an exposure to this idea of boys don't cry, right? It would have been extremely 100%. Painful for you to do that.
100%.
Cool. Nice. Well, that's good. You're a good example of it working, right? And hopefully inspire some people. And I'm sure it's not just guys. I'm sure many women have also been told, don't cry. It's weak, or it's not becoming, or whatever the phrase is.
My wife went through that. She was raised in a Southern household. She went through that exact same thing and struggles with it to cry. But if she would cry if we got into an argument, or if she saw something emotional, she would try to hide it too. So it's definitely women as well, for sure.
Yeah, true. Okay, cool. And talking about self-compassion there, and you said, however that looks for anyone else, for you, are there any tricks, tips, or things you do that about how you kind of work on self-compassion or speak to yourself, etc.?
So how I kind of do it is, rather than berate myself in chat, it kind of goes back to the perfectionism stuff a little bit. Years ago, whenever I would make a mistake, I would just, mentally whip myself in the back, like, and yell at myself and call myself names. But now, just understanding and kind of whispering to myself, like, you made a mistake.
Yeah.
It's all right. You're human. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You're an average human being. You're allowed to do that. And I know it sounds so simplistic. It sounds so elementary, that thought in and of itself, but that's the kind of stuff that it takes, breaking it down to that little bits of berries, like forgiving myself for making a mistake, or not holding myself to this impossible standard with everything that I do. Because before, like, I play guitar, I build guitars, I have many different hobbies, I hunt. If I missed a deer in the woods, it would be a week-long chastisement and beratement. Or if I played a wrong note on my guitar, it would be the same thing. So just learning to forgive myself and cut that standard, that golden depiction that I set myself down at the knees, and just kind of talking to myself, acknowledging that I'm feeling certain ways, like, rather than berating myself for feeling emotional, I'd be like, you know what, you're emotional right now, and that's all right. That's cool. Let's go take a minute. Let's go cry about it a little bit, or let's go journal, or let's just go take a moment for myself. Little stuff like that is what immensely helps me and has kind of moved me into that place where I can start showing. Now, of course, like, I struggle with it still. I'm not, cured. I'm self-compassionate. I love myself. I still struggle with it every day.
Yeah.
But it's constant work. Constant work to catch yourself before you get to that point where you're yelling at yourself for putting a dish in the wrong place.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah, it's like dealing with intrusive thoughts. It takes time, and the same with you've got to recall that perfectionistic part of you, or the bit that's beating you up. I call it the inner critic. So
that's right.
Yeah, so that it takes time to raise the compassionate voice and slowly quieten or drown out the inner critic, but it does change over time, and you're an example of that. And with my clients, I often, when we're working on self-compassion, is come into the, you are human. Like, that's one of my favorite phrases of when my brain's beating me up. It's like, wow, yeah, maybe I messed up. That's okay. I'm going to mess up again because I'm human.
Sure.
And usually my brain
probably
shuts
again
up.
Today.
Exactly, because it's like, oh, well, if he's admitting he's human, then we can't really berate him because it doesn't have any leverage anymore. Yeah. And I'll do better next time. It's 100%. Okay. Yeah.
100%.
Nice. So you obviously did an OCD, and then you did the IOP at a meter.
Yep.
And then the IOP was online.
Yep.
Yeah. Obviously, for anyone listening, IOP is intensive outpatient program. Where am I going with this? What was that like? Like, how frequent was it? How quickly did you get to exposures? Was it exposures in a group? Was it exposures one-on-one? Like, what did all that look like?
Well, it was, let's see, I'm trying to remember. This was a couple of years ago. I think it was about 2.5 months long. 4 days a week.
Wow.
It was a lot. 4 days a week. And I think it was 3 hours a night, 4 days a week. It was like going to a nighttime college class. It was intense with a new baby and all that, but I needed it. That's what I needed. You know what I mean? I 100% needed it. They kind of mixed in the group settings. And we were also we weren't just like the OCD crowd. They would mix us in with people being treated for alcoholism or for narcotics, like different type things. And we would all kind of talk to each other. So it was good and bad in that setting because, naturally at that time, I didn't know how to regulate my triggers as they come into me, and everything anybody would say would trigger me. Whereas now, like, I'm at a place where I can hear a trigger, get triggered, and then bring myself out of it most of the time. But back then, being in a non-OCD group community, it was kind of heavy at times because somebody would say something, I'd start vibrating off into a spiral. But but it was good. It was definitely good to intermingle with different folks. And then as far as exposures, it was pretty immediate. Like they came in hot and heavy. They came in guns blazing for sure. And it was everything began with a group setting, like the first hour and a half are groups, and then the last hour and a half or something like that was one-on-one. They would kind of how they would do it is she would blip in, like give us exercises to work on or different things to do, like different exposures. And she would kind of blip out and go work with somebody else and then come back and we'd talk about it. But it was pretty heavy, like into the exposure. It's very traditional ERP, very, very heavy stuff. There was no dip the toe in the water, which is why I'm thankful that I did no CD to kind of break myself into it in the beginning.
Yeah.
As an initial setup for that. But yeah, it was very, very hot and heavy. They didn't pull any punches for sure.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. And do you think you with no CD, you needed something just a bit more intense and more frequent?
Well, with the no CD back then, I don't think they do it now, but they were at the 10 sessions thing.
Yeah, I think
back when I was with them. Yeah. And so it was like the first 7 sessions, intro session, 3 or 6 sessions of intensive ERP. And then I think it was 2 or 3 sessions. I'm not good at math, but 2 or 3 sessions of like maintenance. And I remember getting to the maintenance portion and I was super anxious. I was like, I'm nowhere near maintenance. You know what I mean? I was still very sick at the time. So I just needed something more.
Yeah.
That's what I needed. I needed something more long lasting because I was still, at that point, I was still identifying with my thoughts. Right. So that was the biggest, toxic masculinity and identifying with my thoughts. Those were the 2 biggest problem areas in my recovery. Well, the biggest adherences to my recovery. So I was still there at that point. I was still like, well, maybe it's something different, but if you're thinking about it, it's probably somewhere down there deep that you can't, all that stuff. Yeah. So I was still there. So I needed something more, and I needed something more intense, not in terms of content, but in frequency.
Yeah. Okay. And did your insurance cover the IOP like completely?
Yes.
Wow.
That was the only one that I could find because I was paying for no CD out of pocket.
Yeah.
And anybody that's in the military that's listening knows that nobody joins the military to be a millionaire.
Yeah.
We're paid well, but not that well. So finding it took a year. It took at least 12 months to find Amita. And I reached out to all these different organizations, and Chrissy Hodges was the one that ended up finding it for me. And even after that, after Amita, they covered the entire thing. And then after that, I couldn't really find an OCD specialist again that took it. And like I said, all of us in the military, we have the same insurance. Yeah. Everybody. So it was a process. It was troublesome for sure. But yeah, they did cover the entire Amita Health IOP.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, and I wonder because obviously you saw no CD a while ago, and I'm not saying this point because they sponsor the podcast, but because I think it's worth raising. They take a ton of insurance companies now compared to what they did 2-3 years ago. So I wonder if the military is now covered. I don't know. I mean, people can look online. I think no CD has like a search thing for your insurance, but I guess the other reason I'm bringing it up is that you're highlighting a clear problem. It took you like a year to find anyone that would, and I guess you weren't even looking for IOP necessarily. You were looking for just any specialist, even weekly. Because historically, I think in the States, not a lot of OC specialists have taken insurance, probably because the insurance companies didn't pay enough, or they were a pain in the butt to deal with. I don't know. I'm just making up these reasons.
Or all of the above.
All of the above, yeah. I know in the UK, it can be a bit of a night. I mean, they pay all right. It can be a bit of a nightmare. At least in my experience. Not always, but sometimes dealing with them. Or at least it's more admin and stuff like that. Anyway, where's my point here? Yeah, that's partly the reason no CD is going the insurance route is to solve that problem. And I think it's some crazy amount of people in the US now that can access therapy through no CD using their insurance, and they're trying to get the other insurances that are really like no one wants to take. They're really trying to get those on board. So hopefully that changes. I just wanted to highlight that so people can search, because it can be hard if you can't pay out of pocket in the US to find a specialist. So hopefully an OCD will take your insurance. But
yeah, that was tough. That was a really tough period in my recovery. But I mean, when I was seeing OCD and paying out of pocket, I haven't looked if they take our insurance with Humana TRICARE at that time or not. But it was at the point where I didn't care what I had to pay. I don't care if I had to take out a loan. I had to get treatment for sure. But yeah.
True.
It was that was also a hot topic I heard of when people were like, there was a show or an interview about like, how do we break down the barriers of OCD treatment and military members asking for help? That was the specific theme. And I'm sitting here watching the show and I'm like, take our insurance.
Yeah.
You know,
but no, you're right. Okay. So, let's think, you've got words of hope. So what would you say to anyone listening that's really struggling?
I would say that it is possible to recover without being too cheesy. You can get there, and it is okay to ask for help. Because even those 3 statements were impossible for me to believe. You know what I mean? It was impossible for me to believe back then that you can do this. There is help available, and yeah, you can do it.
Nice. And then 20-year-old self, what would you tell him?
I would tell him, hey, man, it's okay to cry. Yeah. You're allowed. You're enough. And research your own definition of masculinity. That's what I would tell him.
Yeah.
And to all men. To all men.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Yeah. And billboard. What would you write on a billboard?
It would probably be along the same lines. It's okay to cry. Give it a try. Go and cry. Something like that. Because I know I keep going back to it, but it was the biggest change in my emotional state, is getting to the point where accepting that I could cry and come and releasing those emotions. So yeah, that's what I would put on there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because suicide rates in men are way higher, or at least I don't say way, they're higher than they are in women. And partly of that is men typically use more lethal methods when trying, and therefore more likely to do it. But also I think there's something in there about boys can't express, and the saving grace for a lot of women is they can express, generally speaking. And that might, you imagine it's a release, right? If when you cry, you usually feel better. And if you can't cry, it's just, it's just adding to the depression, the low mood.
And that's a natural reaction. We wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't a natural thing. You know what I mean?
True. Yeah.
So yeah, men would rather that alternative. A lot of them would rather that alternative than to go talk about their feelings, and that's not okay.
Yeah. No, true. Very good point. And then, you coming on today is hopefully righting that wrong a bit. And is there anything else you wanted to say before we finish?
No, I think I got it all out there. I think, I'm just really, really happy to be here. I never, like I said in the beginning, I never thought that I would be in a place where I could come talk to you or anybody about, treatment and OCD and my story and all that. It just seems, like I would never get to that point, but I am, and I'm just really excited to be here and to, talk with you.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it, and hearing your story has been awesome. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us with a one-time tip/donation, please go to theocdstories.com/support. All tips, no matter how large or small, are greatly appreciated. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.